Okay, hello. Welcome to Reading 301. This is the first in a set of reading videos. The later videos will go through actual passages and we'll break down the comprehension piece and the approach to each question. This video is more of an overview on the reading. We talk about the strategy for both sides, for the comprehension and the approach to the question. So we're not actually going to be doing in this video. We're just going to be kind of laying the foundation for how to do when we practice the passages. Videos 302, 303, and 304, and those we'll do some practicing. But with no further ado, let's get into how to approach the reading section of the SAT. So feel free to take notes with me. What I'm setting up here right now is a T-chart. Essentially, the reading on the SAT comes down to two things, and these may seem very obvious to you, but we'll get into the nuances below the actual titles in the T-chart. So the first thing is comprehension, your ability to really understand what you're reading. And the second part, and this is where I'm going to really add some value to your approach, is how you choose the answers. So I'll just put it answer choices here. Okay. So let's talk about comprehension first. And before I even kind of go through the different types of passages, I want to really emphasize that on the SAT, you have 13 minutes to read a passage and answer 10 questions. That's a lot more time than you think. By comparison, the ACT asks the same, but in 8 minutes, 45 seconds. So you're looking at almost 50% more time on the SAT per passage. So as a result, the SAT expects more of you than the ACT. They really expect you to do a little bit of analysis and to understand some readings that can be a bit more challenging. So the approach you need to take is this. Imagine that the author, especially on the nonfiction, is someone who really wants to communicate something to you. They have a purpose. So if it's science, they may want to communicate a new discovery or a new development within the field. So they'll have an intention for writing, and then within that intention of maybe communicating a new discovery is actually communicating the main point of the passage. So the discovery may be that we discovered that I don't know, extra fragrances on flowers doesn't actually attract more pollinators, counter to what people have thought for a while. Actually, adding extra fragrances to flowers can actually attract enemies of pollinators and reduce the visits from pollinators. So whatever the purpose is, you need to know, one, what the person is setting out to, why the person actually bothered to write it, whether it's to communicate a new discovery, whether it's to persuade you of something, whether it's to give you the history of some event, whatever it may be. You want to know the intention of the writer. And then on top of that, you want to kind of know the main idea they're getting at and how they structure that main idea within each paragraph. Think about when you write an essay, hopefully you're actively thinking about, what am I trying to communicate in the introduction? Okay, what is my first body paragraph trying to communicate to the reader? What is my second body paragraph trying to communicate? Well, guess what? It's the same idea when you read. You have someone on the other end who can't talk to you directly, but they've written down their ideas in paragraphs, and they really want you to kind of come away with it, understanding whatever they're trying to impart to you. So you need to take that role as reader very seriously. In fact, you really, really, really want to make sure that you are an active and engaged reader in trying to understand each paragraph and the message of each. And if you don't understand something, try rereading it. You do have time. If you're really having trouble with this sentence, then you can do your best to understand it and then try to use context around it to better understand it. Obviously, you can't get hung up on one or two sentences forever, but the ideas do build on one another, so comprehension is key. But here's where I can help you as an active and engaged reader. There are 5 passages, 13 minutes apiece, but there are really only 3 passage types. And we're going to go through what these are and what you should be keying in on as you do each one. So the first passage type, and this is pretty much always the first passage of any SAT, is a fiction passage. And feel free to pause this video and kind of think to yourself, well, what should I be pulling from a fiction passage? Maybe jot down a few ideas. If you didn't pause, that's okay. I'm going to continue here. So on a fiction passage, there's not a lot of plot development within maybe 6 or 7 paragraphs. There aren't really any heavy themes developed within the excerpt that you have. The big thing is you really, really, really want to make sure that you understand the characters. You want to be able to identify who's who, their relationships to one another, how they feel about one another. And how do you do this? You do this through the way the author describes them. You do this through what they say and think. You do this through the tone of what they say or think. Is a character being sarcastic? Are they being sincere? And you do this through their actions. But you really want to understand your characters as you read and to make a special note of who is who before you go to the questions. So that's for the fiction. Okay. The other type of passage is, and this one international students tend to hate. I'm really sorry about this, but it's typically it's a U.S. history primary source passage. It's not always U.S. history. I'd say about 5% of the time, maybe it deals with like apartheid in South Africa, or it's someone writing about women's rights in Victorian England. But it generally has to do with either the abolition of slavery, workers' rights, things like that, different types of social movements in U.S. history. But this is a history passage, and it's always a primary source, meaning it's always going to be a letter, speech, or maybe a judge giving their opinion on a case. But it's always going to be a person trying to persuade you or communicate you to have a certain opinion on a certain societal topic. And it's going to be written from that time period. So again, feel free to pause the video and think about what you think you would need to get if maybe you have Frederick Douglass writing his thoughts on slavery. Frederick Douglass, by the way, was a free black man before the Civil War, which took place in 1861 to 1865. But anyway, think about what you would want to kind of key in on as someone is speaking to you as an audience member. So for me, it would be kind of what is the topic? So what is the actual societal topic? I'll do this in red. And then pretty early on, I'd want to know, what is this person's position on this topic? I'd want to know, how do they support their position, right? Do they use logical arguments? Do they use data to support their position? Do they, you can almost bet that they're going to try to make appeals to your emotion. But essentially, how do they support their position? And you really need to make sure that from paragraph to paragraph, you kind of follow how they're trying to convince you of their position. Okay, so that's that. And by the way, on any of these, as you're practicing, if you find you get a history topic that you're not really familiar with, don't hesitate to go to Wikipedia and look it up and get some background. That way, if I'm telling you, you're going to see tons of readings on women's rights in the 1800s, tons on the abolitionist movement, tons on workers' rights and unions in like the 1930s to 1970s. Just feel free to look the topic up on Wikipedia and read a little bit about it so you have some background next time it comes up. Anyway, the last type of passage you get is your science passage. And it doesn't have to be biology. It doesn't have to be a traditional science. It can be a social science like human psychology. So 3 of the passages are going to be kind of what I would call science. I'd even actually call it popular science, in that they're taking something that is very specific and nuanced and done in academia, and then they're trying to communicate it to you as a general audience member, someone who's not involved in the day-to-day of this stuff. So again, kind of pause it and think, what type of things should you be pulling, and what structure would this passage have? Anyway, I'll continue talking. So structure is pretty much always the same. It usually starts off with some quick background on what we know. So if it's, let's say, what causes dementia? It may say, for a long time, we've linked dementia to old age, but we've always asked kind of what's actually causing it. And then they'll usually get into whatever the key discovery was. So they'll lead to a key discovery or a key finding. And they may even pose it as a question, as if they don't already know the answer, and you're going to kind of go on a journey with them to find it. But anyway, the key discovery or essential question. So for this dementia example, they may say, could it be that a lack of sleep leads to dementia because of plaque buildup in the brain or something like that? So they could ask the question, or they could say a key discovery is that a lack of sleep is heavily correlated with dementia and could potentially cause it. So after that, what they'll do is they'll explain the experiment. They'll get into kind of the procedure. And then after that, they'll get into the data and they'll kind of analyze the data and what it means. And then after that, usually future studies are proposed, or some outsider who wasn't involved in the study makes a comment. What you're probably noticing is that this, more or less, these popular science passages are going to follow the scientific method, right? They're going to kind of give you what we know in the field up until this point. They'll pose an essential question, or they'll give you a key discovery that's more or less a hypothesis, and then they'll explain how they got there. So anyway, that's what you want to focus on as an active reader. You don't want to just read these passages. You want to identify what type of passage is it, and then what should I do from there? How can I remain active and engaged and make sure that I'm an active listener as I read? Okay, so here's the second part. I have 3 golden rules for you when you approach a question. So it's good enough to have strong comprehension. By the way, out of 13 minutes, you're probably spending about 6.5 on the reading and 6.5 on the questions. So it's about a 50-50 split, 6.5 minutes. It may not always come down to exactly that breakdown, but that's about what it should come down to. And the idea is hopefully you have a good enough read where you don't have to look back for all of your answers. You feel like you've understood it well enough. You do the work on the front end so that it's easier on the back end when you get to the questions. But there are 3 things that I strongly, strongly, strongly emphasize when choosing an answer. The first is every single answer has to be stated or implied in the passage. They're not looking for you to bring in outside knowledge. And they want this to be an objective test. I know reading can be a little bit subjective, your interpretations of what you read, but in order for there to be one correct answer, they need it to be as objective as possible. What does that mean? That means you have to 100% support all of your answers. You have to find textual support. What it also means is that you cannot fall for assumptions. You have to be really careful not to assume things that are not there. And if that means you have to go back and reread, then you do it. So right now, I'm going to give you a fake passage. I'm just going to say it. And I want to know, based off of this fake passage, and you're going to just play along with me, whether or not monkeys love to climb. So you're just going to listen, and you're going to think, do monkeys love to climb, based off of what you hear. Okay. At a young age, monkeys start to climb. Not only do they climb all the time, but they climb with everyone. They climb with their moms, dads, brothers, sisters, aunts, and uncles. So they're climbing at a young age. They're climbing with family members. Monkeys climb all hours of the day, the morning, the night, even in the wee hours of the morning, monkeys are still climbing. In fact, monkeys climb so much in order to build fundamental lifelong skills. Okay, take a moment to think, do monkeys love to climb? Yes or no, based off of that passage. Some of you are going to say yes, and those who say yes are probably going to say, well, they do it with their friends. They do it often. Things I like, I do often. I love basketball, so I try to play as much as possible. I play with my friends. You may say, well, if they didn't like it, why would they do it? And those who say no will say, well, wait a minute. Did it ever actually say how they felt about it? Never actually said how they felt about it. Or you may say, hey, I go to school all the time to build fundamental lifelong skills, but that doesn't mean I necessarily love school. So guess what? For this specific example, it's 100% a no. We just don't know. We don't know whether monkeys love it. And it's not enough to say we can make an argument that they do. This test has to be objective. You need it to be stated or implied. I never said anything about how they felt about it. If I said monkeys swing from branch to branch, grinning ear to ear and giggling, then it's implied that they are enjoying it. But until it's stated or implied, you have to be really careful not to assume something beyond what you're given. That's such an important part of this test. Okay. Rule number 2 builds on rule number 1. So they kind of couple in together. As you're reading an answer choice, it's not enough for the answer choice to be 80% correct. It's not enough for it to be 90% correct. Every single word has to check out. You have to be able to support 100% of answer choice A if you're choosing A, or B if you're choosing B, or whatever. And I'll say answer A, so it's not confusing. It has to be 100% supported, all of it. So let's go back to this monkey passage. Say an answer said, monkeys climb often in order to build fundamental skills and endurance. Well, yeah, the first half of that is definitely stated. We said they climb to build essential skills. I never said anything about them doing it, though, for stamina or endurance. So just because that's not there, because it's not stated or implied, that sours the whole answer. It's wrong. You can't will it to being correct. All of it needs to be correct. Okay, final roll, and then I promise you can get on with the practice. You can look at videos 302, 303, and 304 and see how we do it. But here's the last part of the framework of how to do it. This is going to come as a surprise to you, but read the question so carefully. And that's for all sections of the SAT. Read question carefully, answer exactly what it wants. I can't tell you the number of times that someone finds an answer choice that's stated or implied, but it doesn't actually answer the question. Make sure you're doing what the question wants of you. Okay. So anyway, hopefully you have some good notes and a framework of how to go about the reading. Other than that, the key is just practice, 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 practice. And if you miss a question, understand why you missed it afterwards. Make sure you review your misses. Good luck, and feel free to come back for anything else you need on the test.